What's up, everybody? Welcome to the third segment of tonight's show on the Thomas Take Sports Podcast. I'm your host once again, Ryan Thomas, bringing you another segment of tonight's show. Tony Romo. My take on Dak or Romo was posted. I think the Dallas Cowboys should eventually go back to Tony Romo when and if he is ever ready. I think the window of opportunity is closing for the Dallas Cowboys to compete for a Super Bowl trophy, make it to the Super Bowl. I do have doubts as to whether Dak Prescott could win in playoff football as opposed to Tony Romo. He has had an impressive start to the season, obviously. 6 straight wins for the Dallas Cowboys. That's not by accident. Dak is the future. I think Tony Romo should get his job back, and then Dallas move forward with Dak next season. If they don't, it is what it is. It's understandable. I would understand if Dallas chooses to go with Dak for the rest of the season. He's the hot hand. Things are working right now. If it's not broke, don't fix it, as the saying goes. But we do know for sure, and I do know for sure, I have a good feeling that this is Tony Romo's last season in a Dallas Cowboys uniform. And being that that is the case, being that they'll probably move on from Tony Romo come next season, come 2017, I think that this is obviously a question that should be asked. Where will Tony Romo end up next season? I don't think Tony Romo is going to walk away from the game, losing his job to another quarterback. I think Tony Romo thinks that he has a couple years left in the tank and a couple years left to be a starting quarterback in the NFL, playing at a high level. I don't think Tony Romo is done. I think Tony Romo has a couple years left, as I mentioned. And where will he spend the last 2 to 3 years in the NFL? Where will he spend the last 2 or 3 years of his NFL career? I think it is a slam dunk answer that Tony Romo will spend the last 2 to 3 years of his career on the New York Jets. And the reason why I say this is because there are pieces there already for Tony Romo to be inserted right away as the starting quarterback week 1, 2017, that Tony Romo could have a very successful season with the New York Jets. Their offensive line is average. They have Matt Forte. They have pieces on defense. Their defensive front is impressive. Leonard Williams is coming into his own. Sheldon Richardson might not be there, but Todd Bowles is a defensive guy. Chan Gailey would know how to use a guy like Tony Romo. He'd probably be the best quarterback that Chan Gailey has ever worked with besides Troy Aikman. And Matt Forte would be a dependable option, although Matt Forte is at the end of his prime. Knowing that he would have Matt Forte. Another wrinkle in Tony Romo going to the Jets, I think the Jets have a very, very realistic chance at drafting Leonard Fournette out of LSU. So he would then be joined by Leonard Fournette out of LSU as a young running back that Tony Romo can rely on. And obviously, the weapons at wide receiver, Brandon Marshall, Eric Decker will be coming back, and Quincy Enunwa, who has really shown that he is a breakout talent on the New York Jets. I think that this is a slam dunk move for the New York Jets. Ryan Fitzpatrick, we know what he is. We know that he's a middling A/A-/B- quarterback, or B-/C- quarterback. Last year was a very good season for him, but in the games where it mattered the most, Ryan Fitzpatrick crumbled. And Tony Romo, I think, if he were to be on a different team next year, and if he was on a team like the New York Jets, he would have come into the New York Jets organization, come into the New York Jets building with a huge chip on his shoulder, with a huge "I have a lot to prove" attitude, and I'm going to prove that I'm the man. Especially in the AFC East, he would be compelled to help the Jets do whatever they need to do to win the AFC East and take the AFC East from the clutches of the New England Patriots' hands. Whether they could do that would remain to be seen, but obviously they would have a much better chance at doing that with Tony Romo than they would with Ryan Fitzpatrick or with Christian Hackenberg or with Bryce Petty, and obviously with Geno Smith. Geno Smith, I think after this season, he's a free agent after this year. I think Geno Smith is gone. I think Geno Smith will be let go. Ryan Fitzpatrick is on a 1-year deal for $12 million. Obviously, he's gone. So the New York Jets will have no quarterback option. Whether they acquire Tony Romo in a trade or whether they acquire him in free agency, I think they would make both options happen for their franchise. They haven't had a quarterback in quite some time, maybe since Chad Pennington. And Chad Pennington ended up not having the career that they had anticipated him to have. Keep in mind, Chad Pennington was the first quarterback taken in the draft class in which Tom Brady was taken in the 6th round. Chad Pennington was taken in the 1st round due to the shoulder injuries and elbow injuries that he had had over the course of his career. He never really panned out. So if the Jets were to bring in Tony Romo, he'd be squeezing the last couple years out of Tony Romo's career, and you would be hoping that you can get out of him the type of play that he produced in Dallas, the 300-yard games, the 3-touchdown games type Romo performances. And really, wide receiver-wise, Eric Decker and Brandon Marshall are one of the best wide receiver duos in the National Football League. They just don't have a quarterback. Eric Decker can do a lot with a good quarterback. We saw that with Peyton Manning. Brandon Marshall can do a lot with a good quarterback. We saw that in spades with Jay Cutler. The best Jay Cutler ever looked was when he had Brandon Marshall. Tony Romo could very well look even better with Brandon Marshall and Eric Decker than he did with Dez and T.O. And Dez and T.O. weren't on the field at the same time. Dallas hasn't really had that strong number 2 wide receiver while Tony Romo was there. Patrick Creighton was there when they had T.O. Jason Witten was kind of their number 2. But maybe, being that the Jets have Marshall and Decker, they would then move forward with Matt Forte as a receiving back that Jay Cutler relied on. Matt Forte is a running back that could catch 90 passes in a season. He's not what he once was. He's towards the end of his prime. But as I said, if they draft a guy like Leonard Fournette out of LSU or the other trio of stud running backs that are heading into the 2017 draft, the Jets could have a formidable offense. They could have a formidable defense. I think a move for Darrelle Revis to safety is more likely now than it's ever been. I think he's lost a bit of a step at corner. They'll have to fill that hole at corner. But Revis could move to safety, being that he's lost a bit of a step in speed at corner. He's still a very savvy player. Usually, as a corner's career goes on, he does make that transition to safety. And I anticipate that being the case for Darrelle Revis. The number 2 option I could see, and this was brought to my attention by the one and only Dan Schulk of MFST, MyFantasySportsTalk.com. He brought up a good point to me. And I'm not really stealing his point. I'm going to actually add to his point that the Denver Broncos could be an option for Tony Romo heading into next season. John Elway does love his veterans. He loves to have a veteran leader. Trevor Siemian has been inconsistent. Paxton Lynch has shown that he's a little bit too green. But I think Tony Romo could really help a guy like Paxton Lynch. I think Tony Romo was the type of guy that would be willing to help mentor a quarterback. Unlike the Brett Favre, Aaron Rodgers situation, it would be a situation where Tony Romo would come in and help Paxton Lynch learn and progress as a quarterback. The weapons are there, no doubt about it. Demaryius Thomas is still there. Emmanuel Sanders is still there. The defense is what it is. Von Miller is still there. Obviously, Chris Harris Jr., Aqib Talib. The Denver defense isn't going anywhere. They're primed and ready, and Tony Romo could be an option. Maybe Buffalo could be an option. If Tyrod Taylor is overpaid, which he is, heading into the next year, if they decide that they cannot be on the books for a quarterback that unproven for that much money, they might decide to go with a veteran stopgap option like Tony Romo. A guy that would propel weapons like Sammy Watkins. A guy like Sammy Watkins would only benefit from a quarterback like Tony Romo. LaShawn McCoy would only benefit from having a quarterback like Tony Romo. Tony Romo would only benefit from having a running back like LaShawn McCoy. It is possible. Very possible. And to have a defensive scheme such as a Rex Ryan type defense, where you can rely on your defense to make some plays for you, I think Tony Romo coming to Buffalo is a possibility. I do think it's a possibility. Is it unlikely out of the options I listed? Of course. But it's definitely possible. I think the number one option, though, is Tony Romo to the New York Jets. It makes perfect sense. I think Tony Romo has spent his career, obviously, as the quarterback of the Dallas Cowboys. He's been under the spotlight. He could deal with the New York media. That wouldn't be a problem. And Todd Bowles is the type of coach that would not hang him out to dry. The expectations would be high, obviously, but I feel Tony Romo would become a Jet with a point to prove, and the writing would be on the wall for the New York Jets. What the mission would be for the New York Jets to acquire Tony Romo in order to win the AFC East or try to rip it out of the clutches of the New England Patriots while being more competitive than Buffalo or Miami. The move would make perfect sense for the last 2-3 years of Tony Romo's career. If Dallas wants to move on with Dak Prescott, that makes sense. It's understandable. But what makes sense for Tony Romo after that? If Tony Romo is not going to quit, if he's not going to retire, what makes sense? That makes sense. Tony Romo becoming a New York Jet, it makes sense. Brandon Marshall, Eric Decker, one of the most underrated wide receiving duos in the National Football League. This duo helped propel Ryan Fitzpatrick to throw 30 touchdowns last year. Almost around 30 touchdowns. I'm pretty sure it was 30. Tony Romo could have 40 with the production that he has put up. Tony Romo could easily put up decent numbers if he could stay healthy. That is a question mark, but it's a chance that the Jets would be more than willing to take. It's a chance that the Jets have wanted for quite some time. They haven't had the chance to acquire a veteran signal caller that has actually a winning pedigree, a winning track record. For Tony Romo to do what he's done as the Dallas Cowboys quarterback under the brightest spotlight, I do give him props for that. Has he not really fulfilled his full potential? I would say that. But he has been one of the best Dallas Cowboys quarterbacks in franchise history. And I don't think he's done. I think Tony Romo to the New York Jets is a certainty. And I think that's what we will see come March, come April. Whether it is as a free agent or a trade between the New York Jets and the Dallas Cowboys. Take care, guys. That's my take on what is next for Tony Romo next season as a free agent or as a possible trade chip for the Dallas Cowboys come draft time. Take care, guys. Thanks for listening.